Hello everyone, back tuning into today's second video. We're going to have a look at the weather for the next week to 10 days. For today's second video, this will take us to around the 26th of January, and we'll be able to extend out beyond that with the extended GFS, which runs around a couple of weeks, and also with the ECMWF ensembles. As usual, we'll have a look at the CFS-V2 for next month as well. Just say that today's first video was a 5-day forecast, so as I was on a Wednesday, having a detailed look at the weather for the coming 5 days, and it's getting colder. There's going to be some cold and icy nights coming up, and maybe a little bit of snow around in a few places as well, particularly on Friday, and then again right at the very end, 5-day forecast period. But have a look at that and see what's going on. We'll probably update Snow Watch tomorrow, actually, about the snow risk in the next few days. It is limited in the next few days, but there will be a little bit of snow risk on Friday and again early next week. So that's tomorrow. But this is your week to 10 day video update, and I'll get on that for you very shortly. Got to say a big thank you to our latest patrons. So we've got two new patrons for Gazzovids. We're now up to 57 total patrons for Gazzovids, and a big thank you to all of the patrons for Gazzovids. So, I've got to say thank you to David Edmonds. David Edmonds has become a patron for Gazzovids, and also to Sean Derbyshire. Sean Derbyshire has also become a patron for Gazzovids. Gazzovids' 57th patron. So, big thank you to David and to Sean for becoming Gazzovids' latest patrons. If you'd like to become a patron for Gazzovids and help us to pay for the website by giving us an ongoing monthly donation, it could be anything as little as $1 a month or upwards, so it doesn't have to be a large amount of money at all. But if you would like to become a patron of Gazzovids, then all we need to do is come to Gazzovids' Patreon page. On that page right now, we link to this at all of the pages at Gazzovids and in the description at YouTube. So you just come here, sign up for a Patreon account, and then you can give us that ongoing monthly donation. By doing that, you become a patron for Gazzovids. You'll get a mention in the videos as long as you want to. And if you'd rather not have mentioned, just let us know with when you sign up to your donation, and send us a message and tell us you'd rather stay anonymous, and that will be absolutely fine to do that. Also had a PayPal donation, so I'm going to say a big thank you to our latest PayPal donor. Owen Griffiths has become Gazzovids' latest PayPal donor for Gazzovids. So a big thank you to Owen for becoming our latest PayPal donor. And again, if you would like to become a PayPal donor, then all you need to do is come to the Gazzovids paypal.me page. I'm on that page right now. We link to this page at all the pages at Gazzovids and in the description YouTube. You come here, sign into your PayPal account. Most people have one of those, of course, these days, and then you can give us a one-off donation through through PayPal for Gazzovids. So whether you do it through Patreon or whether you do it through PayPal, you get a mention in videos as long as you want. When you're helping us to pay for our content, you're helping to keep all of the website online, essentially. So big thank you to everybody for doing that, for becoming patrons and becoming donors for Gazzovids. It's been a huge success, blown away by how successful it's been since we started it in June. And finally, just another thank you to David Edmonds, to Sean Derbyshire, and to Owen Griffiths for becoming our latest patrons and donors. And a big thank you to all of the patrons and all of the donors for Gazzovids. Right, we'll start the video by having a look at the Arctic Oscillation Observed and Forecast chart. So, looked at this yesterday, and it was showing a bit of a crash in the Arctic Oscillation. And still some ensemble members from the GFS ensembles are going into a very negative territory, but maybe not as many of them as were the case yesterday. So the black line here tells us where we've been with the Arctic Oscillation. The red line's at the end, where the GFS ensembles are forecasting the Arctic Oscillation to go. Right now we are around neutral with the AO, and we're going to stay around neutral with the Arctic Oscillation for the next few days. But you don't have to go very far on into this ensemble chart to get a real split. So we have got some of these GFS ensemble members going positive now with the Arctic Oscillation through kind of like the final week to 10 days of January. On the other hand, we do still have some ensemble members doing a real plunge, actually plunging off the cliff and going into very negative territory. But I don't think we have as many of those GFS ensemble members going very negative with the AO now. And there is that bit of a split, actually, between the negative and more positive members that we've got, more positive members up there and the more negative ones down here. So very, very uncertain. Very uncertain as we're heading off into the final week to 10 days or so of January, certainly the final week of January, looking quite uncertain now. Just how much northern blocking are we going to get? Of course, it's always the weather that's driving the index, so the fact that we have that split there is telling us that the GFS is either producing still extensive northern block, and I think most of the ensemble members are still doing that, really, but these minority options that are more positive with the AO, those are restricting northern blocking, and so that's the reason those ensemble members are actually going rather more positive with the Arctic oscillation. As far as the North Atlantic oscillation is concerned, again, black line here shows where we've been with the NAO, but red lines at the end where the GFS ensembles are forecasting the NAO to go. We're positive with the NAO at the moment, and the GFS ensembles are basically keeping us in positive territory through to the end of January. Yes, we have got a few ensemble members that are going into more negative territory. They look like they're outliers, really. Most of these GFS ensemble members are going into or staying in positive territory through the rest of January. So the westerlies continue, if that's right, across the Atlantic Ocean. It doesn't look like the Atlantic wants to get itself into a negative NAO state before the end of January, and so that would imply that we probably keep westerly flow going across the Atlantic. But of course, fighting against that is what's happening with the AO, with the Arctic oscillation, where most of those GFS ensemble members still want to plunge the AO into negative territory. So this is a very, very confused picture that we've got here for the final week to 10 days January. And it is really quite difficult to make much sense out of any of it, to be honest. But it looks as though there's still a blocking signal, a northern blocking signal over the Arctic as we go into the final week to 10 days of January. But it looks also as though the Atlantic is stubbornly refusing to let that blocking have as much influence as it could do if the NAO was in a more negative state, if we had high pressure around Iceland and low pressure through the Azores. So this is a very, very difficult period for forecasting. It's a very confused period for forecasting, and we're just going to wait and see how this is going to work itself out. What we can say is that this is turning now into a very mild winter. So CET is updated, provisional to yesterday, 15th of January. Of course, this takes us to the halfway point of the winter of 2018-19, at least a meteorological winter of 2018-19. We had a very mild December, of course, if we was to exclude December 2015, when it would have been the mildest December since 1988. Barely any frost, barely any snow at all during December. And January is now sitting provisional at 5.5 up to yesterday, which is an anomaly of 2 degrees above average. Bear in mind this is 61 to 1990, so it's a colder temperature average, because the 1960s were a very cold decade with severely cold winters and very cold, miserable summers generally. So it is a little bit skewed by that. It's a colder temperature average that this is being set against, but nevertheless, this is still now turning into a mild winter. And if the Gauss-Weber's winter forecast, which is actually for a slightly colder than average winter, was to come off, we do need to see a big drop in the temperature starting very soon and being sustained through the rest of the winter, because at the moment the anomaly is running around 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees above average. So it's been a very mild first half to the winter, to say the least. We did say when we released the winter forecast that although we was expecting a slightly colder than average winter, if it was to go wrong, if that forecast was to go wrong, it would be spectacularly wrong. We would probably come away with a very mild winter, and that's certainly what's happened through the first half of this winter. So it'll be interesting to see how the second half of the winter plays out. We did get the early southern stratospheric warming as well that we expected and anticipated. But then, of course, there were several other things that were pointing towards a milder winter this year. So the Atlantic sea surface temperature anomalies, as I spoke about before, are not well set up for a negative NAO. They're not well set up for colder than average winter this year. We've moved very rapidly into a westerly QBO, quasi-biennial oscillation as well. And the Madokai El Nino that we was thinking will give us a colder later winter period, which we may still get, but that Madokai El Nino has not really come to much either. So putting it all together, quite a few concerns now about the winter 2018-19 forecast, but we're not going to write it off. We'll wait and see how the rest of January and February plays out. Hopefully we will, hopefully from a winter forecast perspective, we will still get that slightly colder end to the winter. Right, so these are how the GFS temperature and precipitation ensembles are looking for the next couple of weeks. We're looking at Penzance down in the very, very far southwestern tip of the country today. Someone's asked me to have a look at Penzance. So, by the way, we are going through the list of locations now. So, in around a week or so's time, I'll start asking you to come up with some more suggestions for places that we can look at in this ensemble section of the daily videos, but still got quite a few on the list to get through at the moment, but we are getting through them, of course, day by day. So the red line here is the 30-year upper air temperature average for Penzance, and we're starting off a little bit on the cool side at the moment. It will be quite cold over the next day or so. Into the weekend, it goes a little bit closer towards the 30-year temperature average at Penzance. So next week, looking quite cold again for a while. Looks like we're getting a little bit of a warmer spell or a milder spell appearing sometime around the 24th or 25th. We have several ensemble members that are going up to there, but we do still have several that are quite cold, and then the temperatures start to drop back again as we go into the final days of January. That's as far as we can go to the 1st of February. Overall, this is still looking relatively cold and unsettled, I have to say. But again, no real sign of going down into the freezer. To go into the freezer, we would have to go to -10 to -15 at 850 HPA. No ensemble member is doing that. The lowest these sort of outlier members get to, this one just here, is -10 at 850 HPA. Most of them are now actually somewhere between 0 and -5. So backing off the cold a little bit within the GEF S over the last 24 hours from yesterday, when most of these ensemble members were between -5 and -10 at 850 HPA. Looking more unsettled, lots of precipitation spikes coming through there. Bear in mind this is in the southwestern tip of the country, so it is exposed to the Atlantic and will be one of the wetter places in the winter, but it's still a suggestion that it's more unsettled for the second half of January. The other point about this winter is not only has it been very mild, it's also been very dry. It's been a very, very dry winter, or first half of the winter indeed, but this does look a little bit more unsettled with some rainfall coming through in the next couple of weeks. I think there will be wintry potential in the next few days as well. And beyond that, we've just got to wait and see exactly how things are going to play out. Temperature anomalies on the 16th to the 24th of January are actually coming out a little bit colder than average, which is something very, very unusual for this exceptionally mild winter, for the UK anyway. So the temperature anomaly from the 16th to the 24th of January, just a little bit below average. And that's the case for most of the central western parts of Europe, actually, just a little bit on the colder than average side for many places. The precipitation anomaly, not sure what's gone wrong there, so that's gone over to America. That's quite strange. So let's try and move this to precipitation. Sorry about that. So that's a precipitation anomaly just there. And it's still coming out drier than average on the 16th to 24th of January. So temperature's cooling down, but it's remaining relatively dry in the next week. As the chart today, might as well look at that. So the temperature anomaly in America shows that many central western states coming out milder than average. It is getting colder, though, in the east and the northeast. It does look as though winter will really be biting by the end of January across much of northern and eastern America. It looks like it turns severely cold for many parts of eastern and northeastern United States of America. Really, really cold conditions are possible there before the end of the month. Right, so this is how the GFS 6 o'clock run looks for Saturday. We've got low pressure stuck across the country, bringing rain or possibly some snow for northern parts of the country Friday and into Saturday. That gets out of the way, and we build a ridge of high pressure in the second half of the weekend and into the start of next week. And then we go through to the early part of next week, bring this next weather system in from the northwest, and that brings outbreaks of rain, sleet or snow across the country through the early part of next week. We'll need to firm up on the exact detail of this, but it is running into quite cold air that will be over the country early next week, and it has quite cold air behind it as well. So what that means is that we could get a stall of the weather system, and that stall could allow an undercut, and we might see some of the rain turn to snow early next week. That low pressure clears away by the middle of next week. We're turning wind into the north. We've got a proper northerly wind coming down across the country then. And that looks pretty cold into middle next week as well. Beyond that, we start to build up this ridge over and to the east of the country, start to pull the wind in from an easterly direction. So later next week, get a little bit of an easterly starting to come through. But it is quite a weak east. It's not a big ridge of high pressure that we've got over Scandinavia. It's not a big blocking system, just a gentle easterly feed moving into the country. We're up to day 10 now. We're under a ridge of high pressure. So that will be bringing quite a lot of dry, cold and frosty weather. And then we've got a weather system coming into the far northwest of Scotland. Again, we have one of these situations through a little bit beyond day 10. This is Sunday, 27th of January. As we move this system in from the northwest, again, it's coming into quite cold air that's established over the country. It does have quite cold air following it as well from the northern Atlantic. So rain, sleet or snow possible there on Sunday, the 27th of January. Once that system pushes through, we have a go at pulling down some colder air from the north. You see all the time these ridges are trying to reach northwards, trying to get themselves into a blocking situation. That's the way the atmosphere wants to go, really. It does want to go towards northern blocking, but all the time, these areas of low pressure just keep piling in from Greenland and Iceland. We can't get rid of them, seemingly. We can't get rid of a polar vortex, no matter what we do this winter. So any attempt to build the region north is just flattened off again as the next low pressure rolls in over the top around Greenland and Iceland. So that's how we finish up on the 1st of February, still in an Atlantic westerly flow with no real sign of northern blocking. This is the GFS parallel run. So again, we've got this low pressure out in the west on Saturday, giving a risk of rain or snow. Friday in Saturday, then high pressure builds across the country next week for another weather system moves in around Tuesday. Again, that could bring rain or snow to parts of the country as we go into the middle of next week, looking quite cold, and then a ridge builds through the UK second half of next week, keeping us quite cold, keeping us frosty conditions going into the second half of next week. Up to day 10 and still on that ridge of high pressure, so still mainly dry but cold and frosty. And then beyond day 10, the parallel GFS run wants to unleash the Atlantic and turns us properly wet and windy through the final days of January into the start of February. Again, you'll notice no sign whatsoever of any northern blocking resulting from that southern stratospheric warming, at least on our side of the North Pole, as far as we can go to the 1st of February. ECM is looking like that. So again, we've got the weather system out in the west on Friday and Saturday. That moves away. We build a ridge up through the second half of the weekend into the early part of next week before we push this low pressure in from off the Atlantic with cold air running in behind it and cold air ahead of that system. We may squeeze out the warm sector and possibly have some snow for the early part of next week. That's how things are looking on Wednesday. So that's quite an interesting chart, really. We've got cold air that's ahead of this low pressure system. We've got cold air that's tucking in behind it. There's probably some sort of weather front that's in that kind of position. So again, you could well get a snow situation, rain or snow situation out of that through Tuesday and Wednesday next week. Once that gets out of the way, we build this ridge in across the country within cold air. So I think next week will be quite cold, to be honest. But after a wintry sort of period around Tuesday, Wednesday, probably going to frosty, dry conditions through the second half of next week. That's as far as we can go to Saturday, 26th of January, under a ridge of high pressure, mainly dry, cold and frosty, just starting to turn a bit mild and a little bit less cold across the far north of Scotland. And then the GEM is looking like that. So again, it all looks very similar through the weekend. In the start of next week, here's that weather system coming in off the Atlantic. Again, it's really struggling, and there is cold air that's being pulled in behind that weather system. Cold air is coming out of Greenland and Iceland down to there, and of course there's also quite cold air ahead of it in that position. So the upshot is we could well find that sometime around Tuesday, Wednesday, we have rain, sleet and snow across the country. And there is very much a suggestion of a storm within that weather system. So again, you'll see this area of low pressure developing just here with a trailing weather front going up to there, telling us that there's a storm developing along that front and probably an area of low pressure developing along it that could give a risk of snow as well through the course of next week. Unlike the other two models, it doesn't build a ridge up in the second half of next week. It just pushes the Atlantic through. So we finish up at day 10 with the GEM looking quite wet and windy. Low pressure is out to the west of Ireland. These are the scenarios that are playing out today within the ECMWF ensembles at day 10, which of course is 26th of January. We have 14 ensemble members, including the control, ECM control run that has high pressure to the north, so they've got a bit of a northern blocking signal. Those 14 ensemble members with low pressure to the south. They're going to be cold. They'll be bringing in the wind from the east. That's kind of like doing what we saw in yesterday's ECMWF run that we included in yesterday's video update. They're bringing in easterly winds and taking that low pressure to our south. So cold with those 14. But they've got number 13, but at day 10 have us quite mild, has a ridge over and to the west-southwest of the country. Low pressure is up to the north. They're westerlies. They're bringing westerlies, and they include the operational ECM run as well. Then we've got a number 12 that have high pressure centred just out to the northwest of the UK. So these aren't desperately cold, but they are cooler. They've been bringing in a bit of a sort of northeasterly type wind. Not as cold as this solution, but probably quite chilly. Then we've got number 7 that have high pressure in the middle of the Atlantic. So they're bringing around sort of a west-northwesterly, probably relatively mild. And then we've got number 5 with a ridge in the Atlantic, but going up towards Greenland with those ones, and low pressure is to our east, and so they'd probably be bringing down quite cold northerly. So it's a real mess at day 10 with the ECM ensemble. So many options are on the table, and it does just highlight again the uncertainty at the moment within the model output. 2 weeks away at 360 hours. This is the final day of January. We see that we've got 12 ensemble members with high pressure through the middle of the Atlantic. Low pressure is to our south. So for southern areas, probably still bringing in quite a chilly easy wind, but for most of us actually, I suspect we'd be importing relatively mild air from off the Atlantic with those 12 ensemble members. Another 12 with a deep trough of low pressure centred right over the top of the UK. They're very unsettled, very wet and probably reasonably mild. Then there's another 11 that has a big northern blocking signal. High pressure is centred around Greenland, and they've got low pressure to the south of the UK, so they look cold. They'll be bringing in easterly winds with those 11. Another 9 has high pressure ridging through the middle of the Atlantic, and again going up towards Greenland with low pressure, more centred over top of the UK. So these ones, the coldest of the air, is probably missing us and going down into the Atlantic. But they'd still be pretty chilly, I think, those 9. And then a further 7 has a mid-Atlantic ridge that does extend back towards some northern blocking. No real trough close to the UK, so they're probably mainly dry, but cold. Again, a real mess within the ECM ensembles as we're looking out towards 2 weeks away. Not a convincing picture in terms of northern blocking here. But I think the ensemble's probably relatively cold overall if you start putting these coldest sort of ensemble members together. But it is a very, very messy picture indeed, and very uncertain still, looking out to the end of January. Finally, the CFS V2, the 500 millibar heights, looking like this. A breakdown to week periods. First week period takes us from the 16th to the 22nd of January, with above average heights to the west of the UK, below average heights extending from northern Europe into western Europe. The flow of the jet is like that, turning more unsettled and also turning quite cold as well in that period, I would have thought. Then we're through to week 2. This is the 23rd to 29th of January. Now, this is a change on what the CFS was showing all last week. For this last week, this is a change on what the CFS was showing all last week for this final week of January, because it's got this trough centred over the top of the UK. There is a very strong blocking signal that we have over the North Pole, but it's more towards the Pacific side of the North Pole. It's more towards there, and that means we've got this trough into the east of the States, and that's where the coldest of the air is going now, down into the east of America. We're quite chilly, we're quite cold, but we're bringing the wind in with some sort of Atlantic type modification. So although it is still quite chilly there for the final week of January, but it's nowhere near as cold a scenario for the UK or for Europe actually as the CFS was showing last week. It has changed its position of the northern blocking. This is how week 3 is looking. It's the 30th of January to the 2nd of February, with the below average heights, again, very close to the UK. Strong blocking signal over the Arctic, but it's more over towards the Pacific and Canadian side of the Arctic, which leaves this trough in the east and northeast of America. Again, very cold air is plunging down into the east of America, and then that cold air comes out of America into the Atlantic and sort of increases the strength of this area of low pressure that's centred close to the UK. Then we go through to week 4, which is the 6th to the 12th of February. Finally, that high pressure starting to get itself into a position that could begin to deliver much colder air into Western Europe. So the high pressure now is centering close to Greenland, and that's the more interesting place for us, because that could start to finally begin to import cold air into that trough of low pressure. Temperature anomalies in the week ahead are colder than average. This is from the 16th to the 22nd of January. They're below average for the UK. They're below average for most of Central Europe as well. So it is quite a chilly week coming up, and there is some wintry potential, as we've already established. Then we go through to week 2. This is the 23rd to 29th of January. Yes, it's still a little bit below average with the temperature anomaly there for the final week of January for the UK. But more importantly, perhaps, notice how extremely cold it is across most of North America and Canada. Exceptionally cold. Off the scale, going underneath 4 degrees below average for much of North America and Canada means that the coldest of the air is pushing down into the Americas. Pushed down into the American side of the Arctic, as opposed to the European side of the Arctic. So America gets exceptionally cold. We are a little bit colder than average, yes, but nothing too dramatic. We're into week 3. It's the 30th of January to 5th of February. Again, exceptionally cold for most parts of America, away from that Pacific coast of America anyway. It's an exceptionally cold start to February for them. We, again, are a little bit colder than average, probably cold enough for a bit of wintry potential, but not big freeze type cold conditions. The big freeze is over in the east of the states. And then we go through to week 4, and that's the 6th to the 12th of February, close to average with a temperature anomaly for us. Still quite a lot colder than average in eastern parts of America, but starting to turn a little bit less cold there from the 6th to the 12th of February. Remember, by that point, it looked like the high pressure was beginning to appear around Greenland and onto our side of the North Pole. So possibly the cold relaxes out of America there and then begins to push into Europe. But that's week 4, very speculative. This is how February is looking with the CFS V2. So these are 700 millibar heights for February. Still going with a strong blocking signal across the northern latitudes, so real northern blocking there across the northern latitudes. It extends down into mid-Atlantic ridge. We're underneath this trough of below average heights just here. So again, this would imply that most parts of America and most parts of Europe could be very cold. For us, we would need to shift that trough of low pressure just that little bit further southwards. This is the temperature anomaly for February. Much of Eurasia and northern Europe looking very cold. Most of northern and eastern America looking very cold. The UK and Ireland, perched out on the very edges of Europe in the middle, in the Atlantic Ocean, finds that our temperature anomaly for February is just close to average. It's not going for a cold and average month. It wants it cold to be across northern Europe and across northern part and eastern parts of America. Of course, that is very, very speculative, so I won't worry about that at all. But coming back to next week, to 10 days, still loads of uncertainty about what's happening for the final week to 10 days of January, I have to say. The models have definitely backed away from northern blocking for the time being, particularly on our side of the pole, but nevertheless it might still be cold enough at times to produce some wintry conditions, so I wouldn't be ruling out snow at some point for some of us over the next few days into next week. There's no sign at the moment, though, in model output today of truly locked in severely big freeze cold conditions. Maybe that will come as we get to February. We'll have to wait and see. At the moment, we're still focusing on colder compared to what we've had through this very mild winter, and also quite unsettled with a little bit of snow potential at times. Right, we'll do it all over again tomorrow. And as I say, tomorrow I think we'll probably have snow watch for you as well, because there will be some wintry potential in the days ahead. So I think we'll discuss that a little bit more for snow watch tomorrow. That's all for now, and thanks for watching.